Hello, everybody, and welcome to this joint Crealogix Intersect webinar, Keeping Wealth Management Secure. My name is George Bailey, and I'm Marketing Manager at Crealogix here in the UK. And just a quick word about who we are. Crealogix is a banking and wealth management software provider, delivering a system of engagement that's fast to deploy, while also being highly flexible and extensible. Our solutions are all about working together with our clients to build and deploy a more engaging, customer-centric digital service with the effect of enhancing end customer loyalty, boosting the firm's conversion of new business, and improving scalability. Intersect is an innovator of customer-centric fintech solutions. Financial services providers and other enterprises rely on Intersect's patented mobile identity system to provide both security and the best inconvenient new digital experiences to their customers, irrespective of the service channel. Intersect solutions enable you to concentrate on your innovation roadmap while delivering intuitive, low-friction digital experiences to your customers. Today, I'm speaking with Intersect's Head of Solution Consultancy for the UK and Ireland, Simon Rodway. Simon is an expert solutions architect and software developer who has a huge depth of experience in both retail and financial services sectors, with his work having included marketing, product development, and service delivery. Simon, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, George, for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to this. It should be fun.
Thanks, Simon. So our title today is Keeping Wealth Management Secure, and we are focusing on digital investor platforms. And clearly this is part of a wider topic of cybersecurity. So Simon, can you begin by introducing what specific part of this very broad topic we're going to cover today, and who would benefit from paying closer attention to these topics?
So in effect, what we're talking about here is not the complete broad cybersecurity focus. We're not gonna look at all of the various nuances that cybersecurity covers. We're actually going to focus very specifically on an aspect of security that I guess we should all be familiar with, and that is our personal identity and how we authenticate ourselves within the digital space, and what that means to us in terms of the roles that we play in our day-to-day working life, in our day-to-day natural life, whether that is securing our online presence, whether that is dealing with our existence in wealth management or in personal banking, and how we authenticate and verify ourselves in the online space, and how we do that in a way that makes it secure and safe, so that we can mitigate fraud and mitigate the risk that fraud means and has in terms of our financial lives.
Yeah, so Simon, if we've been in the era of the internet for a while now, and really there's been the issue of needing to log in or authenticate almost as long as any internet services have existed. So how has the modern era of the smartphone made this a bit more tricky for us?
Well, I guess what the internet has done as a whole is open up the opportunity for engagement, for communication. It's brought in many new ways of interacting with people in a much faster and, I guess, real-time mechanism. And because of the benefits that smartphones themselves have brought, the ability to communicate instantly, that they've also brought with them some risks, because that communication channel can be compromised, and when that communication channel has been compromised in the past, the implications of that have become quite, well, heartbreaking for some people. Having your bank account hacked because the communication channel wasn't secure, and having gone to check your balance to find that there's no funds there, especially this time of year when everyone is obviously out spending. It's key to know and understand how that network and how that security works within that mobile channel, and the mobile phone itself. The ubiquitous nature of the mobile phone kind of means that there is an opportunity there to not just enhance our day-to-day lives, but to improve the security. The technology within the modern mobile phone today is greater than the technology used to put man on the moon almost.
Right, so everyone's becoming more and more kind of entangled in their digital life, and this means that the question of login and security has become entangled in their daily life in a way perhaps that's not as separate as it used to be. So I've asked the question on the slide here: who needs to care? Can we have a look at that question from the financial services point of view? Because one of the questions I had actually when inviting some of our customers and contacts to this webinar isn't this just a technical topic? Isn't this something just for our IT department to think about? Would you agree with that, or would you say that the issue is a bit wider?
Oh, I would definitely say the issue's wider. In fact, to be quite honest, I would say it's very dangerous to just leave this topic to the technical experts and to the IT administrators. A business, a banking, a financial institute, an organization as a whole needs to be aware of this situation, aware of this topic. They also need to embrace the benefits that a strong, secure platform can bring and weave that into their user experience that they provide as a service.
Okay, well, I'm going to come back to that question, I think, about the stakeholders within the financial services firm towards the end. Before that, I want to kind of get to grips with some of the basics of the topic that we're talking about here. So, let's establish some of these basics about login and authentication, if I can. I want to kind of take a very high-level view, and can you just give us an explanation what a password is? What is a password, and perhaps what's gone wrong with the idea of the password?
So I guess 10 years ago or more, the concept of a password was relevant in that it was something that you knew, something that only you knew, and it was a structure that would have been probably a word or a reference, or I guess in some cases maybe a date of birth, but information that was probably not so easy to come by. Today, the whole nature of passwords, I guess we now have password policies that mean you can't use regular words. You have password policies that mean they've got to be longer than so many characters. They have to have special characters in them. So effectively what's now happening, and I guess everyone can probably relate to this to some degree, is you either have to remember very complex character strings, which usually means you either write them down and stick them on the post-it note in front of your monitor, or you have a password management tool where you store all of these things. Whichever way you actually manage passwords, it's got to the point now where it's not practically possible to remember them all, especially given the complexity of password structures and password policies these days.
So would you say, Simon, that there's a sense in which there's just no correct answer to that? You try to educate everybody about a better passwords and password security. It just means that either people are going to work around it, or the following those guidelines just becomes too impractical for most people.
Well, if you speak to a neurologist who knows a lot about how your brain works, they will tell you that on average a human can remember accurately up to 7 digits. If you're now going to a password of 15 characters, the ability to remember that means you need to structure that password in a way that is memorable for you, which usually means a phrase or some sort of structured sentence that you can remember. The problem with that is if you speak to a neurologist, they'll tell you that your brain works in certain ways, and someone that can use social engineering can potentially work out what that structure could be, and the ability to guess becomes easier.
Can you talk a bit about, even if somebody has I suppose a perfect password or a very good strong password, why permitting users to log in just with that one password may represent a risk to the business or to those users?
Well, simply put, it's a single factor. I guess we'll talk more about factors later, but it is one piece of knowledge, and if that one piece of knowledge is compromised, then the entire system becomes compromised, because there isn't that is, if you like, the key to the door, and there is one key. And if you are able to guess that key or compromise somebody else's key, then you've opened the door. And a fraudster, that's their goal. Their goal is to try and take a guess at what that password might be, but they do it with tools and techniques these days. That means they can sit in between the keyboard and the screen digitally, and they can capture that keyboard typing process. So they don't even need to guess what it is, because you type it in inadvertently in the wrong screen, and somebody's captured it.
So if we think of that a single password as a key, it's even if you've taken the best precautions, the concept is just perhaps too weak for what's required nowadays.
I would definitely say so, and I guess we're starting to see some of the larger organisations, certainly some larger fintechs, coming out with statements and policies to move away from passwords. I know from a wealth management perspective that the goal is to really try and move away from passwords completely and go to a more secure proposition, so that you don't have to write things down, you don't have to use password loggers, you don't have to use mechanisms to store a password so you can remember it in the future.
Okay, so you've mentioned about these different factors, and you've mentioned about knowledge. So I think let's try to unpack that a little bit, because I think that can help explain this sort of better approach to things. So can you tell us a bit about what these factors really mean, knowledge, possession, and so on?
So there are in effect three factors that we pretty much look at. There's what we call inherence, something you are, whether that would be your biometrics, your fingerprint, your behavior, your actions, etc. There are a lot of things that would fit in inherence. Then we've got something, knowledge, something that only you know. Now, this could be something that is unique to you, but unique to you that you only know. It can't be your, I guess, credit card number. It can't be the 3-digit CCV on the back of your card. They're not knowledge. Then they are something that only you perhaps know, but somebody else can easily read that on your card. So it's not something you know. Ideally, knowledge shouldn't be in the context of what the answers to common questions are. Your mother's maiden name is often considered as knowledge that only you know. Well, I'm pretty sure there's quite a few other people that know what your mother's maiden name was.
No, that example of mother's maiden name is quite, I think that comes up quite a lot in these sort of second level security questions. So can you explain why that doesn't really help? I mean, surely we're saying multiple factors here. If you ask somebody for password and then a second bit of information like that, why does that not satisfy multiple factors?
Well, the problem there is password is knowledge, and mother's maiden name is knowledge. So it's not multiple factors, it's two of the same factor. So that
Okay,
doesn't
so
actually
it's
help.
got to be mixed. It's got to be at least two different factors.
Yes, and I think when you look at the regulators within the banking sector, that's the pattern that they have actually laid out. That really this should be, you take something from one factor and something from a separate factor. Two things from the same factor do not constitute strong customer authentication. Obviously, and then the third factor that we have here would be possession, something you actually own. So we can think about this for those that are familiar with, well, let's take ATMs, your cash withdrawal. That is two factors: the card, the piece of plastic you put in the machine, and the PIN. That's two factors. So that would be considered to be
Right, and you have to have both of those,
You've
that
got to
only
have
you
both,
have it. Right.
and only you have it. Now, obviously, we have things like the shoulder surfing, which is one of the techniques that fraudsters use these days, where they know that they can potentially steal your card, and all they have to do is watch you type the PIN in. And
Right,
this
but
is
they've
where
got to steal both parts, haven't they?
they have to get both. They've got to get the PIN and the card
Right,
to be able
right.
to get the high value prize thereafter.
What about the online? When you're sort of doing your online shopping, quite often have this 3D secure coming up with your credit card, where you have to put in an additional password to verify that it's really you making that purchase. Is that an example of multi-factor authentication?
Well, that's more an example of poor security. Oh, okay. Let me be a little bit more specific. The 3D secure model, as we've known it historically, 3D secure version 1 was 3 letters from a password that you may have typed in on a system 2 or 3 years ago. You don't often get, certainly in the UK, you don't often get challenged with a 3DS version 1 passcode. That is, you're right, it is an element of knowledge. It would come into the security window that we're talking about, but I wouldn't necessarily fit that straight into strong customer authentication because it is just one piece of knowledge. It's not
Okay.
multiple factors.
So you mentioned there was sort of perhaps a previous version of that and new versions, and you've mentioned secure customer authentication. So can you just recap a little bit what's happening there in the banking and payments world?
So strong customer authentication, the SCA piece, which comes out of the EBA, the European Banking Authority, they drafted a technical specification as part of PSD2, which you may be aware of. And the technical specification for strong customer authentication literally outlined this principle of multiple factors. It outlined what the regulatory authority for certain sectors within the banking world needed to do to secure end user engagement. That
And
was
they've embraced this model that we've got on the screen at the moment, right? They've embraced
absolutely,
that it's got to be
absolutely and not only have they embraced it, but they've actually regulated for it, and they have outlined what they consider to be inherence, what they consider to be knowledge, and what they accept as possession.
okay. And this is affecting banks and payment firms. So do you think it's fair to say that this is going to go wider? Do you think it's going to become a kind of global set of best practices?
Absolutely, to be quite honest. And to be fair, I think what I would actually say was when this was originally drafted, the RTS for strong customer authentication, the definition on strong was quite clear. I think the reality is this is not going to become, this is not strong customer authentication. This is just going to become customer authentication. This is just going to become the authentication model as a whole. And the continuous march of technology and the continuous drive, not just in terms of fraud prevention, but also the tools and techniques that fraudsters use, will mean that there will be a continuous evolution of what is strong, what's deemed to be strong.
Okay.
So things like knowledge, the EBA earlier this year had to come out with a clarification document on SCA to define what they considered to be acceptable knowledge, ruling out things like mother's maiden name.
Okay, so there's a sort of, as you said, there's a movement over time, and what's secure last year may not be considered good enough in the coming years. So can we have a look at some of the existing methods that are deployed for second factor of authentication and try to kind of assess these? So the first thing that jumps to mind for me is these hardware tokens, where if you have a bank that has given it to you, you have a little kind of plastic key with maybe some buttons on it, and this is going to give you a second factor for your logins. So what exactly are those things, and can you talk a bit about the pros and cons of those hardware tokens?
So those hardware tokens, the small calculators, sometimes the financial institute will issue one where you have to put your credit card inside it or your debit card inside it or some other, it is the device and something else. And together they generate a cryptographically structured code that you enter into some other system. Or you generate some sort of key that you can use to authenticate yourself into a platform of some form. Typically, though, they're low powered, low CPU. They don't have a great deal of intelligence. They have software that's on them. There have been issues in the not so distant past, where hardware token providers have had to reissue all of their tokens because their software was compromised. In fact,
So do you mean there that physically the device has to be thrown away and they have
yeah,
to mail
start
out new ones?
yes.
Right, that sounds kind of a nightmare. But would you say that's actually a quite a likely risk to consider for hardware tokens?
And I think as technology moves on, absolutely, I would say so. Yes, I would also say that they have a shelf life. The hardware token really does have a shelf life because in the end, there's a battery. It's a
Right.
closed unit, and there's a
Yeah.
battery inside it, and that battery is going to expire sooner or later.
Okay. And just to clarify from our previous slide, a hardware token is a possession factor, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So another thing then, which we're perhaps getting more familiar with now, is receiving passcodes by SMS, and that's obviously better in some senses because you're not having to take the cost and complexity of mailing little bits of, as you say, keychain calculators out to everybody, and everyone has a mobile phone, so they can receive the SMS code. So, could you talk a bit about that as a second factor? Isn't it kind of cheaper and more convenient?
It's certainly more ubiquitous. It's certainly cheaper in terms of the administration and management. That's true. But there are challenges with SMS. SMS of itself is an insecured protocol. It's not that there are forms of secured SMS, but the SMS protocol in general, the message is sent in the clear, as it were. So you have to be careful as to what you put in an SMS message because it can be seen openly across the GSM network. It's also the SMS is bound to a mobile phone number and a SIM card. And the challenge that means is that if you're in possession, again, this is a possession factor, if you're in possession of the SIM, you receive the SMS. If someone can copy that SIM, that's possible, then they will also receive the SMS instead of you. And we've seen significant cases, and we will continue to see more of these as SMS OTP specifically is used as the customer authentication factor.
So,
Because
how theoretical or practical is that sort of SMS attack? Is that just a kind of spy tactic, or put me in the shoes of a fraudster? Can fraudsters use that SMS attack now?
absolutely, and to be quite honest, it's easier than you would actually think. There are mechanisms. There's a situation called, or there's a challenge called SIMjacker. A lot of SMS OTP providers use things like location. Where are you physically? As part of an enhanced SMS OTP delivery. But there's a protocol called SIMjacker, which means someone can send you an SMS message that has some embedded codes within it, and what they get back is your geolocation. And this is in the clear. It is available today. It's not difficult to do. So what has been happening, certainly in the retail banking space, and we've seen cases of this in the press in the last few weeks and months, where people have said that they've had their bank account compromised because someone cloned their SIM card. All you need is the IMEI number, and you can clone the SIM card. Or you even easier than that, all you need to be able to do is know what your mobile phone number is, know some details about you, go into a mobile phone store, say you've lost your phone, and they'll issue you with a new SIM card. All you have to do today is answer some of those socially engineerable questions like, what was your mother's maiden name?
Right.
Because they ask you what your password was, and invariably it'll be whatever that maiden name of your mother was.
Right, and then it's extremely difficult both for the individual user and for the bank or financial firm to really protect against that, because it's a bit like your ATM attack that you described there. Somebody's got a copy of your debit card and now they know your PIN, so they've got both of those factors. And if they've managed to then compromise that SMS second factor, and then they've got your login from some other method, then that looks, to all intents and purposes, like the genuine user.
Absolutely. The only thing I would say is OTP, one-time password, of itself is not a bad thing, because if you deliver a one-time password and it's used once, then it can't be compromised thereafter. I guess the primary issue here is not the OTP side, it's the delivery protocol, it's the SMS side. And you're right, an organization wouldn't know if that SIM has been compromised. However, the GSM network providers, the mobile operators, are starting to introduce various services around the world. In some countries, it's already readily available, and this is rolling out, which is the ability to do SIM swap detection, where you can actually basically say, has that SIM life been changed?
And that's in itself evidence of an awakening to this risk that's been happening.
100%. But the problem with it at the moment is it's expensive. It's the cost. Not only do you now incur the cost of the SMS, but you also incur the cost of the SIM swap detection process as well.
Okay, so we've talked about a couple of these different ways banks and payment providers are solving multi-factor authentication, and consider some of the shortcomings, possibly some of the risks here. Can you talk a bit about what's emerging now, perhaps as the next generation, as a better alternative to either hardware keys or to SMS?
Yes, so we mentioned earlier about the ubiquitous nature of the mobile phone and how the mobile itself has changed the way we engage as humans. But within the context of the mobile phone, the smartphone specifically, the technology inside these devices is, when you think about it, in the last 30 years, the technology is staggering. The capabilities that these devices have, the CPU and compute power that they have, the capabilities of biometric processing, the storage they have, they contain a hardware security module, which is a protected storage space. They have capabilities that, like I said earlier, are greater in many ways than the compute power used to put man on the moon. So within that context, within the context of the smartphone, that now introduces something called out-of-band authorization, the ability to reach out and engage with somebody outside of the channel that you are currently engaging with. So if you think about wealth management, how a relationship manager would actually interact with their clients, either over the phone, conversationally, through their online platforms, however they may engage. Alongside that, you have an out-of-band authorization channel, which allows you to now reach out to the person separate to that communication channel to get an authorization and authentication. And with the introduction of the compute power that smartphones bring, and the ability to use asymmetric encryption and the technology available around the cryptographic capabilities, we can now provide a new secure mechanism that allows anybody, whether that be a relationship manager, whether that be a high net worth, whoever that would be, to confirm and attest to who they are and where they are and what it is they're trying to do.
Is it fair to say that, I mean, it also helps that if your authentication is being done through a secure application on a smartphone, then you kind of get an extra layer of security, because access to that application could be, it requires unlocking the phone and maybe secondly unlocking the app, so you can kind of take advantage of fingerprints or Face ID.
Absolutely, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that more security shouldn't necessarily mean more friction, because the reality is the more steps you put in front of somebody to secure their life, the harder it becomes for them to actually use the platform, and the connection with the environment is lost. And I guess this goes back to what we said at the very beginning: who should be concerned about this? If we leave this to the IT experts, then we'll end up with the Fort Knox of financial security, whereby you really can't get in.
And
And
it's a bit like those hardware tokens, which can be very troublesome for the users.
Especially if they've left it at home and they're trying to transact somewhere.
Right. Right, and with more modern methods through a secure application that's talking straight back to the financial institution, and both sides know that they're talking to the same to the right person. That potentially means that you can make the workflow much easier for the customer, right?
Absolutely, and I guess that there's a key element in what you've just said, that both parties need to have the level of trust that they're talking to the right party. So it's all well and good the relationship manager knowing that they're talking to the high net worth that they're managing, but the high net worth also needs to know that they're talking to the right relationship manager, and any secure out of band authorization solution should enable that. Unfortunately, at the moment, because of the drive towards PSD2 and strong customer authentication, too many solutions have only thought of one side of that particular coin.
Okay, so I think that's an interesting point about perhaps the industry as a whole has been very focused on payments and banking because of PSD2, and I wonder if you could talk a bit about wealth management and whether you feel that when you feel this is going to start applying as a matter of regulation. What are perhaps some of the special use cases to consider about implementing better multi-factor authentication?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, the fact that obviously the EBA focused very much on the payment space. They focused very much on the retail banking space. They focused very much around open banking and changing the way that the banking sector worked. That they've not as yet focused on other areas like wealth management. But the reality is, as a wealth management service provider, that the platforms really should actually go beyond what the EBA have said for retail. Because just consider the price. Consider the price from a fraudster's perspective. If they can compromise a retail banking account and gain access to funds on the retail space, yes, okay, there are more people they can target and they can do a broad brush approach. But in wealth management, you can socially engineer your high net worth because they're often either in the public domain or often have a profile that is fairly easy to find. And if you're able to compromise that as a fraudster, the prize you gain is far greater.
Just much bigger amounts of money involved, and that increases the risk.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, okay, there are other mechanisms within wealth management, we know, that deal with fraud prevention, that deal with various other aspects of cybersecurity. But there is no better security, I guess, than making sure that someone can't get in the first place.
And
Or making sure
Right, and there's also an information side, as you mentioned. A lot of the clients that you deal with in a wealth management firm could be quite high profile, whether they're perhaps famous people or just high profile because of their wealth. And that information security is quite important, I suppose, even if it's not about draining somebody's account. Just leaking the information could have terrible consequences.
absolutely. And I guess if we look at not necessarily directly the same, but if you think about brand awareness and the implications of data security leak and what that means in terms of your brand presence, we can think about maybe the Panama Papers or one of those kind of things, where the consequences of data leak and compromising data security, the implications are vast. And I guess within the high net worth and wealth management space, if you can understand where someone is depositing or investing or whatever they're doing, the implications of that can be quite lucrative when used in other areas. So again, keeping that information secure, and I know we've got other regulatory requirements around things like GDPR, which don't necessarily come to play here, but certainly have to be considered when you're looking at a cybersecurity solution that secures identity.
It's about making sure that the users within the firm are also protecting their access to information. It's not just about the end user, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and to be honest, that's actually probably more important to some degree, because if the high net worth is compromised, that is catastrophic.
Yeah.
But if the wealth manager is compromised,
Yeah.
that goes beyond catastrophic, because that's just not one that's not just one relationship that's damaged. That's a number of relationships.
So wherever those staff users are logging into systems, essentially wherever there's login, there should be a question about how that login, how secure that login is, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and not just login, but any transaction that they then execute.
Right.
There is really a communication channel, and I guess this out of band channel can be used and should be used when you consider the user experience. It should be used to confirm actions and activities, not just login. It should be used around portfolio management, etc.
So can you expand just briefly on that? Can you? I think you've actually talked about that in the Crealogix blog. If the listeners have a look at that, they'll find an article by Simon about this. But you've mentioned the secure channel. Can you explain a use case for that for wealth management?
So think about, I guess, portfolio management, where you've got not just necessarily one action, but a number of steps in that process.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have, I guess, in corporate banking, we had this 4 eyes principle. Somebody creates, somebody confirms, and somebody executes. There needs to be a dialogue, an ability to be able to maintain a communication through the life of that transaction, whatever that might be. So a good use case here would be things like, as a wealth manager, a relationship manager, you can communicate with your clients in a secure way, and they can respond back. Now, maybe you've got to send them a confirmation of investment. There are rules around MiFID II of how that should be done and how that legal attestation needs to be obtained. This secure channel can be used and should be considered as an asset to be used when obtaining those confirmations.
And because you can prove that each end of that conversation is talking to the right person, it becomes much more difficult to attack it or to compromise it via social engineering, where one side is not the person that they're supposed to be.
Absolutely. Okay. And I think that is the key point. The fact is that if someone says, yes, I've read, understood, well, actually read and at least acknowledged the complete context of what's been delivered, can't necessarily attest to whether they've understood it. We haven't quite got to neural processing yet.
Okay. Well, I just want to try to kind of bring this back to some action points, really, for wealth management audience listening to this conversation. And I think we've talked a bit about this is not just about the end users. I mean, it's very important for the end users to have proper secure logins. It's important for wherever there's a login for staff members. Looking at these, all of these systems, well, who are the stakeholders who are involved here? Who should be really sort of losing sleep about this, and where would you go to start looking for the people to talk to inside the wealth management firm?
I guess this goes back to probably the initial opening questions around who should be concerned, and within wealth management, everybody should be concerned.
So there's got to be a basic level of everyone looking at this and making sure that they're up to date with their level of understanding and technology.
Absolutely. Everybody from the executive team right the way down to the clerks should be aware of what this topic is about, what this means, and how it affects how they're going to operate.
Do you see this being about ripping out a lot of software and changing fundamental systems?
Ideally not, actually. That causes too much disruption, and actually opens doors that are unnecessary. You actually want to be very careful on how you apply this, and you need to apply a proposition that allows a very much omni-channel security proposition, i.e. something that can be used across all the different media engagement, whether that's call center, whether that's even to some degree through online, through whether that's desktop online or mobile online or whatever that might be, or even might I go as far to say as almost face to face.
Yes.
There are elements of legal attestation and regulatory attestation that you need to actually confirm. So even in a straight dialogue, the obtaining the legal signature, the digital signature, and the authorization to execute, all of that should be considered.
Well, it's a bit back to what we discussed at the beginning, I think, isn't it, about how the digital world has become completely entangled with our normal world. So the questions about authentication and knowing that you're speaking to the true, correct person you're speaking to has become part of a daily life question.
Yes.
So as a last question, then, can I just ask, what would you give to people as a takeaway as they go back to their desk after this? What do you think the audience should do? Who should they be asking questions to? Where should they take their questions?
Well, I mean, obviously, not to be too forward, but certainly come to Crealogix and speak to you guys around the way that you've integrated the authentication authorization mechanisms within the wealth management platforms. That obviously that's the go-to here, but also internally, definitely speak to your IT security people without a doubt. Make sure that they're aware of what is happening, but also speak to the wealth managers themselves. Understand how somebody engages with their clients. There is no point in putting in the Fort Knox of security if it prevents them from doing their job.
Right.
Because that will never get used. The ideal solution here is the one that provides the right level of security for the action and transaction with the least amount of friction.
Right, and it's got to be adopted and understood, otherwise it's just pointless.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's a really good point to draw this conversation to a close. So thank you very much, Simon, for a very interesting conversation today. Thank you to everyone who's been listening in live. If you submitted questions to Simon ahead of this webinar or in the GoToWebinar client today, we'll be following up with you one-to-one to respond after this. So keep an eye out for the recording of this webinar, which will arrive in your inbox in the next day or two. And we'll also be sending you a bit more info about Intersect's technology, so you can find out some of the details about what Simon's been talking about today. So that's all for today. Thanks again from me, George Bailey at Crealogix, and catch you later in cyberspace. Thanks again, Simon.
Thank you, George. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.